So is that possible he will sell Taiwan to China if the price is right?
Well, look, I think if Trump saw a really big deal that would make him look like the deal maker of the century, yeah, he would do something like that.
大家好，我是范琪斐，
我是可心，
欢迎收看《匪夷所思》。好，那今天阿姨想知道，请到的真的超级大咖。
你有没有觉得最近一直在讲说
对
真的是超级大咖？
是真的，我都没有想到我们请得到啊。那我们今天请到这一位，我觉得很多朋友一定都听过的，就是 John Bolton 啊，波顿。然后呢，他就是以前曾经在川普时代当过他的国家安全顾问。
对
，OK。然后他的那个，就算不知道他的名字，应该也听过他这个书里面讲的那一段话哦，就是他说他跟川普在那个 Oval Office 在椭圆办公室里面，就有一次就讲到台湾嘛，川普就跟他形容说，台湾就是一个原子笔尖，然后中国呢就是一个桌子，就是这个桌子这样。我想这个 quote 呢，就是来自波顿的书里面。OK，那这个波顿的虽然是非常之赫赫有名啦，不过我还是请可心把他的简历跟大家讲一下。
我们现在在称那个 Bolton 的时候，我们都会说 Ambassador Bolton， 因为他在2005年一直到2006年，在小布希时代的时候，他是担任美国驻联合国的大使。那他我想大家最印象深刻的就是在2018年4月到2019年9月的时候，担任川普的这一个国家安全顾问。那他自己的作风是高度的这一个对中鹰派，所以我想台湾很多人会认识他，也是因为他对中国这个强硬态度。但他之后就跟川普闹翻了，所以待会大家再去看这个访谈的时候，也可以心里有个底，就是他跟川普是闹不和的。那他在跟川普闹掰了之后，跟很多离开川普这个川普团队的人一样，就是写了一本书。那本书叫做《The Room Where It Happened》，就是中文叫做事发之事。OK， 那这本书在台湾也有这个中文版。对，
我
们都有看，
我们都有看，然后共同的感觉就是，他
很真的就应该是
口述的，应该是口述的，所以这个口述历史啊，就是要从口述历史的角度去看这样子。OK， 但是这一次跟波顿约得到，我其实非常的惊讶啊。然后因为他真的很忙啦，然后那个再加上说，我觉得可心是真的很努力，一直试。那我们当初当然是最早的时候是设计啊，是希望在选前就能访过他。结果选后访到他，我觉得也挺好的，其实也蛮好的。然后我就觉得那就非常确定嘛，而且他对于川普的确是有相当程度的了解，
第一手资讯了。
对，没错，因为他是的确跟川普有非常密切合作过的这个关系。虽然当然最后是撕破脸啦，我觉得大家只要记得这件事情。所以讲到川普的时候，应该是蛮严厉的。我觉得是蛮严厉的。那因为他非常忙，所以我们其实只有20分钟，所以今天这一个简介的部分非常的少啊，然后就是让大家可以听听他的想法这样。那我想在这边先讲一个，因为我们预告一定会播出了，就是他在里面就讲到一句话，因为我就问他说，是不是真的川普有可能把台湾卖给中国？然后我们这个问题其实问过很多不同的专家 ，OK， 然后我觉得没有一个人像他那么直白，大家都说，我有点担心啊。
我觉得也是因为波顿已经毕竟跟川普闹翻了，然后他也70好几了，所以他也没有之后要再入阁或是任何这个压力，所以他想要讲什么他就自由的讲出来。
对，所以我们预告里面就有剪了这一段嘛，就是他那待会大家可以看到他怎么回答的 ，OK， 我觉得真的非常的直白这样子。那好了，那我们接下来就直接来听听波顿是怎么说的吧。
Hi, good morning. How are you?
Hi, how are you? Thank you very much for doing this for us. Since we only have 20 minutes with you, I'm going to jump right in. Okay, so your book is very popular here in Taiwan. Okay, in your book, you mentioned that President Trump links Taiwan to the tip of a Sharpie and China to the Resolute desk. I have to say that when I was reading that, I feel that he doesn't really care about Taiwan. That's my perception. And he doesn't really care Taiwan as a democratic ally. We are insignificant for him. But I'd like to know, when you heard the comment, what was your thought at that time?
Yes, I thought that Trump was trying to indicate Taiwan was insignificant compared to China, and that the issues that the United States had with China were altogether more important than Taiwan. Now, of course, this was back during his first term. During the recent campaign, he said Taiwan had stolen the microchip business, when in fact we know that Morris Chang left Texas Instruments because he didn't get, people weren't interested in it, came to Taiwan. Taiwan saw the advantage, and the rest, as they say, is history. But that's just another indication of how little Trump knows about the wider world. Now, I think that things like the recent announcement that Taiwan would buy even more military weapon systems and equipment from the United States is a good thing. Taiwan has enormous support in the American Congress, and it will have supporters in the administration. On recent announcements about Marco Rubio being Secretary of State, Congressman Waltz of Florida being National Security Advisor, I think these are two strong Taiwan supporters. So it's as with many things with Trump, nothing is predetermined, nothing is really very predictable. But it will require, I think, constant reminders of how important Taiwan is to the United States and really to East Asia in general. We haven't yet heard from Xi Jinping. He will certainly make some overture to Trump in the very near future, and that could have a lot to tell us about what the future would look like.
Okay, so we heard that Trump sometimes, President Trump, I meant, sometimes when he is not very interested in certain issues, he like to delegate that to his staff. So is this true? So well, I think my question is that how much room that Michael Waltz and Marco Rubio are going to be for their own jobs?
Well, again, that's hard to say. It's very interesting, I think, that many of these national security positions are being announced so quickly after Trump's election. There have been some domestic appointments, largely dealing with immigration and the Mexican border. But the really big announcements have been in the national security area, which is somewhat different than the pattern in Trump's first term. So I have a feeling that means Trump is going to be more interested in these issues perhaps than he was before. But again, this is just a prediction based on sort of normal calculations of how Washington works, and Trump defies all these calculations. So I think it's important to see what the other nominations in the national security area are going to be, the other big appointments, the Defense Department, the intelligence community, the Treasury Department, and then who the deputies are and other appointments like that, because the government is big and complicated, and the personalities, even at the deputy or third tier level, can still be important.
I think, one of the comments that he had on this campaign trail is that he kept saying that Taiwan has to pay for its protection. Okay, so I have to say that a lot of us here in Taiwan is very puzzled. So what does that mean? When you say that we have to pay for our protection, in what form? How much? Is this? What do you think he was? Was he serious about that? How serious he is?
Yeah, Trump doesn't really understand collective defense alliances. He doesn't understand NATO. He doesn't understand bilateral alliances. And he basically thinks, let's take NATO as an example. He basically thinks the United States defends Europe. We don't get anything out of it, and the Europeans don't pay for it. So therefore, what good is NATO to the United States? And he doesn't appreciate that in a functioning alliance, a good alliance for the United States, we do get benefit from having allies. Our national security is enhanced, as is their national security. That's why it's a mutual alliance. But he thinks we do all the work, they get all the benefit, and they don't pay for it. And so I suspect, I don't know for sure, that's what he means about Taiwan. We defend Taiwan. We don't get anything out of it. Doesn't make any difference to us. and Taiwan doesn't pay for it. So that's all I can say is, that puts Taiwan in good company. All of Europe, South Korea, Japan, Australia. It's a very, I think, erroneous view of how good alliances work. But because Trump doesn't understand the alliance concept, this is where when people say he's transactional, that's what that means. If you do a business deal to build a building, you do the deal and that's it, then you move on to something else. Whereas an alliance, if it's to be effective, has to be a long-term proposition. And he just does not get that concept.
Yeah, but this takes us to another question that we here in Taiwan often ask, is that since Trump is a businessman, he sees everything as a deal, he's transactional. So is that possible he will sell Taiwan to China if the price is right?
Well, look, I think if Trump saw a really big deal that would make him look like the deal maker of the century, yeah, he would do something like that. I think he'd sell almost anything if he thought it would bring him attention. And this is the sort of thing we're going to see play out first, I believe, in Ukraine, where the early nominations are of people who don't really hold Ukraine's security in very high regard, I think. And I believe in Beijing, they are going to watch what happens in Ukraine very carefully, because they will conclude that if the United States won't try to prevent aggression on the continent of Europe, it's not likely to prevent aggression in the East China Sea or the South China Sea. I mean, I'm worried. I'm not disguising the fact I'm worried. That doesn't mean the outcome is inevitable. And this is where Taiwan has always had a very effective diplomatic presence in Washington. It's had good success in Congress. Whatever resources can be brought to bear to help explain Taiwan's story and what the threat from Beijing is, this is definitely the time to start applying it.
Okay, so we talk about Congress, okay? I know that, Taiwan has been working very hard in getting the support from Congress. And since this time, Republicans get the majority both in House and Senate. Do you think they could probably keep Trump in reign? I mean, do you think how much room they can sway him?
Well, I think it's important, because I think that making clear what the domestic political reality is will have an impact on Trump. Notwithstanding, bear in mind, he cannot run for a third term. So when people talk about the political impact, he never has to face the voters again. But I think the big issue on his mind with China and much of the world is the question of tariffs. And if in fact the U.S. gets into a trade war with China, or the rest of the world, then I think what happens to Taiwan will fade, because I think neither China nor the United States, I think China will see that they've got enough difficulty on their hand that more pressure on Taiwan is less likely. But on the other hand, this is the context where Xi Jinping calls up Trump and says, look, we tried in your first term to negotiate the biggest trade deal in history. It didn't work, and Biden made a mess of things when he was in office. The two of us need to get together, and we'll make this deal. Trump would take that offer in a second. So while Trump's rhetoric during the campaign and his current posture is very negative to China, that could change in a flash, as any Trump position could change in a flash.
Mm-hmm. And then, talking about like paying for our protection, okay? I think, there are people, actually, I talked to a news person today, and then he actually told me that he thinks it's a good thing because, at least there's a price tag. We know how much we are going to pay, all right? Yeah. And then, but my question is, if we really pay for the price that he's asking for, will we get a guarantee for the Taiwan's defense?
Well, it depends on how good Taiwan's bargaining is. And I wouldn't be necessarily very confident that Trump would stick with the deal. I mean, he's just, he's that kind of actor. But there is, in certain circles in Washington, there's a feeling that Taiwan is a free rider, in the sense that they know in the past that the U.S. has been willing, even in the midst of the ambiguous status that we had, still willing to come to Taiwan's defense in most cases, and that has given Taiwan a false sense of security. It's the same kind of argument people say about the NATO allies, that they know we're a major presence and they have no incentive to meet their agreed upon targets of spending 2% of GDP on defense. I think that perception of Taiwan is incorrect. In other words, I think people in Taiwan know exactly what the threat is that they're facing and are determined to resist it. But this perception in Washington that Taiwan is free riding is still out there. I think a number of steps begun when Tsai Ing-wen was president, and now with President Lai. I think that's changing, but I think more can be done to help dispel that misconception. And I think increased weapon supplies also help to do that. It is a fact that most democracies around the world have not spent enough on defense for a long time, not since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. Remember, it was the end of history, and it's the economy stupid, international political risk is gone. That was never true, and it's obviously completely false today. So everybody's going to have to adjust. The Japanese Prime Minister Koizumi, before he left office, promised to double Japan's defense budget over the next 5 years to reach the 2% level. And I think we're all going to end up spending even more than that. So this is not something that Taiwan should think is a burden placed on them, because, as I say, I think it was going to happen anyway. Now there's just more than one good reason to do it.
I do. I think, here in Taiwan, I think we are in consensus that we are going to crack up our defense budget. Okay, I think this is a consensus, but by how much is a big question. Yes. Okay, but 10% of GDP is not possible. That's what Trump had mentioned. This is a number that he mentioned before, because 10% of GDP is not. I don't think it's just simply not possible. It accounts for like 80% of our government's annual budget already. But I like to know, what do you think most likely is the number? There are a lot of people saying 5%, and then so do you think that there's a number out there?
Look, for Trump, 10% is a number he plucked out of the air. He could have said 20%. I mean, it doesn't make any difference. My own view of American defense spending is that right now we're at about 3% of GDP. And I think given the overall strategic situation around the world, we're going to have to go up to Reagan era levels, which are 4 or 5, maybe up to 6%. I don't think necessarily everybody else has to go to that level, but certainly 2% is not going to be enough. The Brits are already looking at 2.5 or 3%. I think 4%, as the U.S. moves up, others are going to move up. So the countries in greatest peril in Europe, for example, Poland is already over 3%, very close to the U.S. level. And so I think that ought to figure into Taiwan as well. We'll see as Japan expands its defenses. I think South Korea under President Yoon is going to be doing the same. So I think everybody's going to go up. And remember, in the Cold War in the 1950s, when Eisenhower was president in the U.S., leaving aside spending on Korea, defense spending in the 1950s for the United States under Eisenhower was between 9 and 13% of GDP. And yet 1950s was one of the most prosperous decades in recent American history. So defense spending, if you're concerned about your security, you spend what you need to spend.
So Ukraine, what's going to happen to Ukraine? We are also going to watch it very closely here in Taiwan. What do you think is the outcome going to be? Because Trump say it like he can end the war in 24 hours. Okay, once he's elected. So what's the outcome going to be at this point? I like to hear what's your prediction.
Well, Trump, as you note, said he would get Zelensky and Putin in a room together and solve it in 24 hours. That isn't going to happen. But I don't think Trump has much idea beyond that. There are a lot of people who purport to advise him who have one plan or another. But we don't know yet. We've just had a very interesting phenomenon in Washington where Washington Post reported that Trump and Putin had a telephone call last week, and got a readout from the Trump side of the call where he said to Putin, "Remember, we've got a big military in Europe, and you need to take that into account." The Kremlin is denying the call ever took place. Now, this is not an ambiguity you can resolve. There was either a telephone call or there wasn't. Even the Ukrainians don't believe the call took place. So I mean, this is, to me, I've never heard of anything like this before, where a president or a president-elect has a telephone conversation with the Russian leader, or maybe he doesn't, and nobody seems to know. So when people say, well, how do you forecast what Trump will do? If you don't even know that this telephone call has taken place for sure, how can you predict what Trump is going to be doing in response to it? So I think it's certainly not a conflict that's going to be resolved in 24 hours, and it may take a lot longer. That's not good news for Ukraine, because as long as there's a ceasefire and a ceasefire in place in Ukraine, that increases the likelihood that the territory Russia now holds will be behind a Russian-Ukraine border as time goes on. That's what's bad news for Ukraine.
And when I look back to Trump's record about negotiations, I have to say that I have some concern, because if you look at Afghanistan, he talked to Taliban directly. At that point, I think the Afghanistan government doesn't have a say on the negotiation at all. And then when we talk about Abraham Accord, a lot of people praise him as a very successful record. But what I look at is that it doesn't include the Palestinian people's voice in the negotiations. And then in my head, some part to do with the Hamas attack, lead to that, because the Palestinian people believe that they have been ignored. So I have to say that, and at this time with Ukraine and Russia, I really like to know how much of Ukraine's voice will be heard. And then when I took it back to the cross-strait relationship, I have to say I'm concerned. Maybe our voice will be ignored too.
Well, I think this goes to the question of who else Trump is going to appoint. I think from their political rhetoric before, both Marco Rubio and Michael Waltz are strong supporters of Taiwan, and I don't think if they were not in the administration, they would be critical if Taiwan, the negotiations just took place without Taiwan being present. Whether they're able to persuade Trump to that or not, we don't know. You can't guarantee an outcome with Trump once he gets started. That's why, to me, the point of maximum danger comes when he and Xi Jinping speak for the first time, and we'll know a lot more then about what the threats are, what the possibilities are, than simply from who he's naming to his cabinet.
Okay, so with Trump's being so unpredictable, I'd like to know, do you have any suggestion for us how to deal with him?
Well, I think it's a question of continued activity, persistence, and not always asking him to do things, but just being in his mind all the time. I think the foreign leader that had the best relations with Trump in the first term was Shinzo Abe of Japan, and he called many times, he visited whenever he could, he played golf with Trump. That's harder for Taiwan to do, but I think the approach is right. Just don't assume things are going okay. Be in touch at all possible levels as often as you can.
Okay, I think I should let you go. This is our 20 minutes, and then, but Jessamine, would you like to have one question before we let the ambassador go?
Thank you, Ambassador Bolton. It's really pleasure to meet you. My one last question is that what do you think would have Taiwan done right in his first term, and what can Taiwan do better during term observing Taiwan's relations with U.S.?
Well, I think he had really very little contact with Taiwan. What would be the closest analogy I would think would be 2019, which was a 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. Normally, the White House would issue a statement remembering the protesters in Tiananmen and criticizing China for the massacre that occurred. And Trump said, "I'm not going to issue that statement," which was the first time that happened. So if you look at that as an indicator of how Trump thinks, here these demonstrators were trying to get a democratic government in China, and they were crushed by the Chinese military, and Trump didn't want to remember them. The point is, don't let Taiwan be forgotten. This is really the point I was just trying to make. And there are many people, I think, who can help with that from outside Taiwan, in Europe, in the U.S., and elsewhere. And I just think it's important to keep reminding him of what Taiwan has done, not because of stealing microchips from the United States or anything else, but as a matter of its own achievement. I just think you have to keep telling the story and hope that you get through.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. 好，那可心我们讲一下 take away 哈。然后我第一个 take away 当然就是我问他说台湾会不会被这个川普卖掉的时候，他就说会啊，有可能。他直接就是说，如果那个 deal 让川普看起来他很厉害的话，他是有可能做这个事情的哦。这个的确，我们这个同样的问题，其实我们问过蛮多人的，像之前在 Ryan Haas 啦，或者是那个 Michael Massa， 我们其实都问过同样的问题，但是所有专家们的回答其实都我觉得是比较保留的，顶多就是说我很关切。那甚至 Ryan Haas 当时的说法是说你不至于 OK，我觉得，可是只有这个波顿，他是真正是跟川普一起工作的人，他就说他觉得是有可能的。而且他真的觉得那个就是价格卖得很好的时候是有可能的哦。那我觉得这个其实是讲到一个我觉得大家可能很担忧川普可能做的事情，可是大家都不愿意讲白了。那我觉得这一次是波顿就直接这样讲出来，我说实在我也觉得，你那时候听到的时候你感觉怎么样？
我还是会有一个，
你有觉得很 shock 吗？
我没有到觉得很 shock， 但是我觉得还是有个底，知道就是说。我坦白讲，我觉得这个几率很低啦。第一个，这个费用到底要到多高？而且川普他也不是，我知道波顿他不断在讲，他是一个就是 deal breaker 嘛，那他就是在意钱的这个东西，什么东西他都能够交易。但是我也觉得川普旁边还是有人。那我觉得我们这次很幸运的是，我们在访的时候，刚好我们已经知道，就是 Rubio 跟这个 Michael Waltz 的这个国安顾问，
不过那时候国防部长还没宣布。
对，所以我觉得他也很清楚的强调，就是他旁边是有 strong Taiwan supporters 的。所以我个人是觉得他反映的是他对于川普这个人的个性，但是有没有反映到整个美国的白宫的体系，我觉得我还是有一些保留啦。
对。然后当然他讲到其他的任命的时候，他有讲到嘛，就是从那个 Michael Waltz 跟这个Mark Rubio 的这个任命，他说这么快的时间他就宣布了，就是显然呢，川普对于国安这一块是应该有点兴趣吧，这是他推断的结果。
对，
他推，因为不然不会说第一波的这个人事任命就是都是有关国安的嘛，所以如果他有兴趣的话。是件好事还是坏事，其实大家也不敢讲。OK， 所以我觉得接下来，我觉得波顿在讲说，就是川普有可能把台湾卖掉这件事情，我觉得是凡事都要做最坏的打算。OK， 我觉得在看事情的时候是凡事都要做最坏的打算。那我觉得他就是把最坏的那个情况讲出来，就这样子而已。OK， 但是看其他，我是觉得我觉得还是要看其他啦。而且另外一个，我觉得很重要的就是他一直在提就是台湾能够做的，就是不断的在国际社会要强调台湾很重要这件事情，我们自己不可能忘记这件事情。而且另外一个就是你要怎么样让川普觉得我们很重要呢？
对，
买武器。就是加强我们自己的国防，我觉得是啦，这是其中一个方法。
我觉得他提醒给台湾3个重要提醒是：第一个，我们的国防预算要增加。那因为这个，我觉得这个跟这个 Ryan Haas 跟 Michael Massa 还有接种等等的这些专家提的是一样的，就是对于这个非常注重数字的这个未来的这个总统来说，我们就必须要把这一个国防预算增加。那虽然这是一个非常不是那么好的一个 index， 毕竟台湾的 GDP 是浮动的这种 出口导向的国家的这个 GDP 很容易浮动，但是对于数字敏感的人，这是你必须要做的。然后他给了清楚的数字，他是说至少是 3%， 然后可能可以拉到像是 Reagan 时代的时候，美国的这个国防预算是4到5%，所以我觉得他也讲得很合理，因为美国自己就是拉到3%，那我要帮助你，是不是你也要拉到3%？
对，我觉得我们只做到3%大概是最低标准的啦。
对，
低于这个的话，恐怕我觉得来自美国的压力是一定会很大的。我觉得这个大家应该有心理准备。
那第二个我觉得很重要，他是说在华府还是有一些声音认为说台湾是 free rider， 就是台湾是这这个搭便车这样子。那我觉得这个是台湾确实要好好去解决。那解决的方法，我觉得他也讲的就是就是提升国防预算。OK， 那第三个我觉得非常重要，他就说 you have to have a constant reminder how important is Taiwan， 就你必须要有直接跟川普可以对到的人。他说他举的例子是这个安倍总统可以跟川普一起去打高尔夫球这种人，但是我觉得又让我听到有点难过的是，他说我知道对台湾来讲要做到这件事情很难。
对，
我唯一想到的是郭台铭
对，其实我就说实在，觉得郭台铭的时候要去威州建厂的时候，我真的很希望他盖得成，因为盖得成的话，因为威州是摇摆州，
对，
我们就盖得成的话，我们的确就是在这中间就是有话语权了耶，这真的就是会有话语权了。不过现在看起来好像应该是盖不成吧，应该盖不成。不过亚利桑那州的那个台积电的厂我觉得也是会成为一个焦点。那也有学者提出来说，应该希望也许邀他去亚利桑那州的这个厂看一看，也许可以加深他对于这个台湾半导体业的贡献这个部分让他加深印象。好了，我觉得今天我们讨论到这边差不多了然后我也非常欢迎大家来谈一谈就是你今天听波顿这样讲之后，你的感想怎么样？我相信蛮刺激的听起来蛮刺激的这样。
那我可以在最后感谢一下，因为我觉得这一次这应该也是我们访大人物，就为了美选访大人物的最后一集，
最后一波了，
最后一波。那我觉得在过去我们访了像 Michael Maza 朱静怡老师等等这些真的很大咖的人，真的我不得不说感谢很多很多在台湾在美国政策圈非常重要的一些伙伴，不管是都是台湾人，不管是学者或是这些媒体人。那这一集真的特别感谢 Rath， 就是帮助我们可以邀请到这个Ambassador Bolton。
这个是很多人协助之下的结果啦，真的是非常感谢大家。OK， 好，那今天就也希望大家把你的感想告诉我们，留言告诉我们。所以喜欢我们这个节目的话，应该要
按赞、订阅、分享、抖内。
好，谢谢大家。